Welcome back. So in this lesson, I want us to look at error handling and how we would actually provide our error handling as a JSON response. Now again, in the first series, we actually did deal with error handling. And so a lot of what you will be seeing here should look familiar. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is to create a new file that will have our error handling code. Okay, I'll put that in API. So errors that go. All right. So I will proceed to write a bunch of methods that deal with the individual errors. All right. So this package main, and I will import FMT, and of course I will import net/HTTP. All right, so our first method will be log error. Okay, and so we'll use this to log our error messages. Okay, so we have HTTP request, and we will have the actual error. So once we are provided with these two things, we will simply call our logger, and we will display that error message on the console. Okay, that's straightforward enough. So let's now discuss error responses. Okay, so we want to send JSON formatted error messages. All right. So let's create our first function. Now this function will be named error response. Okay, and we expect to have a response writer. We expect to have the request. We expect to have a status code. And of course, we expect a message that we want to have in our response. And so that message could be, we're going to use interface, the empty interface. So it could be of any valid type. Okay. So once we have this in our header for our method, we will go ahead and actually fill in the body. So what we want to do is to create the JSON response. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a variable. Let's say env, and this will be an envelope. All right. And so the tag name will be error, and the value will be the actual message. All right. So once I have that, then I'll proceed to call write.json to write that for me. And so we know by now that write.json returns an error and we need to check that error. Okay, so let's pass in W. What else do we need to pass in? Status code, status. Let's pass in the actual data, env, and let's pass in any headers. which for now is nil. Okay, and so we need to check this error. If error not equal to nil, then we know something went wrong with the writing. And so let's just log that message. Okay, so we're going to call the log error function that we just method that we just created. I'm going to pass in R, and I'm going to pass in the error. And once we've done that, then let's just return the header. So we're going to write the header. Okay, and we're going to simply pass in 500, meaning internal server error. HTTP dot status internal server error. Okay, so whenever we need to generate a JSON response, we will be calling this error response method. All right, let's look at what happens when we have a runtime error and we need to provide that internal server error response. Okay, so server error response. Okay, so again, it's going to be on application, and this is going to be called server error response. All right, and so we're going to have w http dot response writer. We're going to have http request, of course, and we're going to have the actual error. Okay, so those are the three things that we will need, and then we will proceed to actually generate our response. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to first log the error. Okay, that's straightforward. So I'm just going to say app.log error. Okay, and I'm going to simply pass in R and the error. Now once I have logged the error, then I will need to actually prepare the response. So I will prepare a message with the error. Okay, so we're going to have a message variable, and this message, of course, will say something like the server encountered a problem and could not process the request. Okay, so that is the actual message. And so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to say app.error response. An error response requires W, it requires R, it requires the status code. So HTTP dot status internal server error, and it expects the message which we have created. All right. And so that is how we would handle the server error response. So again, whenever I have a problem with the server, we're going to log that error, we're going to prepare a message, and then we're going to call the error response method, which as a part of its job is to create that error message, okay, add the tag error, and then call write JSON to prepare the message, to write the message as a JSON object. And then of course we need to check for any errors. All right, great. So that's what we do for the server error. Notice we have methods calling other methods. All right, and so that's kind of okay. We don't want to be writing a lot of code in one method whereby we have to repeat that code. So we just take that functionality out and place it in its own method. Okay, so let's look at another response. So we're going to look at the not found response. Okay, so again, this is very similar. What we're going to do is going to be on application, of course, and we're going to call that not found response. And of course, we need http.responseWriter, and we need our request object. Okay, and all we're going to do is to simply create our message. So let's craft or create our message. Okay. And so this message, since it's about page not found, will simply be something like the requested resource could not be found. Okay, and once we have that message, all we're going to do is to call the error response method, pass in W, pass in R, and pass in the message. Okay. Okay. So, okay. For to pass in the HTTP dot status not found. Now I can pass in message. All right. Great. So that's very straightforward. Again, this code doesn't really need much explanation because it's the same thing we did in the previous series when we needed to have centralized error handling. Okay, let's look at what we would respond to when we have a method not allowed response. All right, so let me just copy this, put it here, and name of this method is simply method not allowed response. Okay, and so I will simply remove this and I will say http dot status, okay, method not allowed. Now let's craft our message, and so to craft our message we need to create a formatted string because the method is not fixed. We could use different types of methods, so we need to be able to have our string be dynamic. So I'm going to create a formatted string. So fmt.s_printf, okay, and so I will say the modulus s, all right, so whatever the method is, it's going to be replacing that modulus s. Method is not supported for this resource. All right, and then that will be our that method. All right, that's straightforward. So it doesn't matter what the method is. If it's not supported, then modulus s will be used instead. So for example, get is not allowed, maybe you will say the get method is not supported, right? So that's the reason why we use a formatted string, because we want our message to be dynamic. All right, so that is straightforward. And so since we have these responses, right? So whenever there's a server error, we'll generate a JSON response. In other words, the error will be shown to the user as a JSON object, right? Whenever we can't find a page or whatever, we can't find a resource, we're gonna generate a not found response as a JSON. And likewise, the same thing for method not allowed response. Every error message will be sent back as a JSON object. So all we have to do now is to use these newly created methods. Okay. So if you go to health check, notice here we did all of this. We don't need to do this anymore. All right. All we have to do is to say app dot server error response. We pass in W. We pass in R request. Okay. We pass in the error. Okay. And that's all we have to do. All right. So with that out of the way, let's move on to the other handlers. So let me look at the school.go and let's see where we are generating errors. Right here, notice this not found. We're going to replace that with app dot not found response. And not found response requires the writer and the response writer and the request. Okay, straightforward. Anything else we need to replace? Oh yeah, right here again, we don't need this anymore. We don't need that anymore. So all we have to do is to write our app dot server error response, and we need to provide W, we need to provide R, and we need to provide the error message. Okay, and that takes care of that. Is there anything else we need to look at? Let's see. Routes, if I recall. Do we have any error messages in routes? Oh, okay. We don't, but one thing we can do is to implement the error handling on our HTTP router. So HTTP router allows us to specify what type of error messages we can work on. So let's look at this. HTTP router. Okay, let's try this again. What I want to show you is the fact that we can customize our router. So let me go to my docs. Okay, well, send me back here. Let's see if we can new router. All right, so we can configure the not found option, and we can configure the method not allowed option. So instead of using a generic error message, we can say that, you know what, whenever you have a not found or a method not allowed, I want you to use our JSON error formatting. All right, so that's what we want to do. So all I'm going to do up here, okay, is to simply say that router that not found should be handled by my not found response. Okay, so app that not found response. Okay, now there's one thing that you'll notice. It says cannot use da 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 because we need a HTTP handler. That's easy to do. Remember, we can take our methods and we wrap it with handler func, and it becomes a handler. So HTTP dot handler func. Okay. Okay. So by using handler func, I have now fulfilled the requirement that not found, all right, HTTP.handler. So whenever the router hits a not found error, it will call not found response. And that error, which would have normally been 404, will now be returned as a JSON object instead. Let's do the same thing for router dot method not allowed. Okay, and so all we're going to say is whenever there's a method not allowed error, we don't want the router to use its default error message. We want it to use our default message, which happens to be a JSON response error message. Func, and so we'll pass in app dot method not allowed response. Okay, so those are all the changes we need to make. So let's test this out and see how our new error handling capability is functioning. Right, so the server is up. Let me open a new terminal. Let's see what the error messages look like. Let's say I do curl -i localhost 4000 / let's say ice. Right, this doesn't exist, but let's see what we get back as the error response. Right, so we get back the header, of course, but notice we get the response, the error, as a JSON object. Error, the requested resource could not be found. Right? Great. Let's try something else. Let's say 4000 v1 / schools / 0. Okay, we get back the response 404. Okay, again a JSON response. Let's try to do a put or method not allowed. So let's say health check. Okay, and let's perform a post or even a put. Let's say a post. All right, so 405 method not allowed. And then it tells me, see the post, so it's telling me what is not allowed. The post method is not supported. Likewise, I could change this to put, and it would tell me the put method is not allowed. Okay, so what about something like changing the header, the host name, that is. That's h. Let's say host is say dollar signs maybe. So in that case, that will work. But what would happen if I change it to something that's not recognizable? Let me change my character set to type some Mandarin. Let's type you. Oops. Let's try again. Yep. Can I or can't I type Mandarin in the command box? Yes. All right. Let's see if that makes a difference, if it breaks it. All right. So notice I get a bad request, malformed host header. All right. So what I'm trying to point out to you is this is not a JSON response. This is coming from our server. And so the point is we cannot we cannot make, or we cannot account for every possible error that the server will throw at us. And so it means that we cannot make a JSON response for every single error. All right, so the best we can do is what we do. 404's method not allowed, internal server error. The rest we'll have to make do with the server giving us the error as just a string. All right, so that's it for this lesson. Again, it's just us centralizing our error handling, which is something that we did in the previous series on building web applications with Go. All right, I'll see you in the next lesson.